Welcome back to Klepper's Corner. Today in history. Ah yes, January 23rd, a date that appears at first glance to be just another chilly winter day where you're trying to remember whether your New Year's resolutions still count if you broke them sometime around January 2nd. But peel back the layers of time and suddenly this random square on the calendar reveals itself to be a cosmic jamboree of imperial overhauls, earth-shattering disasters, medical revolutions, geopolitical embarrassments, constitutional rebalancings, and, because history has a sense of humor, television events that glued half of America to their screens. January 23rd isn't a date, it's a historical Costco. Everything's in bulk, and there's way more happening than you intended to deal with. So let's grab a cart, mentally sample some pizza bagel bites in the aisle, and roll into the deep, weird, extraordinary timeline of this day. Segment 1. The Ming Dynasty rises, and the Earth itself falls apart. Let's begin where all good history lessons start, with a peasant turned emperor and an earthquake that rearranged China like someone shook the world's biggest Etch-a-Sketch. In 1368, Zhu Yuanzhang, who had the kind of underdog origin story Marvel would kill for, declares himself the Hongwu Emperor. This guy goes from orphan monk wandering around during a famine to founder of the Ming Dynasty, which, frankly, is a leap so dramatic it suggests he had one hell of a LinkedIn resume. Something like skills, pitching hay, overthrowing empires, managing direct reports in the hundreds of millions. Hongwu wasn't just restoring Han Chinese rule. He was basically rebooting China with the intensity of a man who looked at the Mongol Yuan dynasty and said, I can fix him, but in the national sense. He eliminates the chancellor position so no one can challenge him, centralizes power like it's Black Friday and absolute authority is 90% off, and then enacts agrarian policies that would make modern farm lobbyists weep with joy. And if that wasn't enough, Ming porcelain becomes the global luxury brand. Imagine a world where your national flex is, our bowls are so beautiful they destabilize trade routes. That's power. But then, fast forward to January 23rd, 1556, nature steps in and says, oh, you think humans are running the show. Shaanxi is hit with the deadliest earthquake in recorded history. 830,000 lives lost. An incomprehensible number. Like if every person who claimed they would move to Canada if their candidate didn't win actually did it, all at once. Why was it so deadly? Because people were living in yaodongs, homes carved into loess cliffs. Loess, the only soil type that says, I look sturdy, but I crumble under pressure. Kind of like Congress. When the quake hit, the cliffs turned into collapsing sandcastles, and entire communities vanished in seconds. And somehow, in the aftermath, ordinary people rebuild using bamboo and wood because they figured out, through firsthand trauma, the basic principle. Maybe don't live inside a giant Jenga tower made of dust. Meanwhile, the Ming government is dealing with corruption, border conflicts, and now the earth itself folding like an overcooked crepe. Honestly, if the dynasty had a Yelp review in the 1500s, it'd be rough. 1 star, too much shaking, would not recommend. Segment 2. The Royal Exchange opens, and Liechtenstein accidentally becomes a country. Jump ahead to 1571. While China is dealing with tectonic wrath, England is thinking, what if we put capitalism in a building? And boom, the Royal Exchange opens. Sir Thomas Gresham, a guy rich enough to make rich people uncomfortable, decides London needs a fancy place to do business. Before this, trade happened on the streets, which was messy, loud, and inevitably smelled like fish. Like aggressively fish. Queen Elizabeth shows up because if there's anything monarchs love more than beheadings, it's ribbon-cutting ceremonies, and declares the structure the Royal Exchange. She even gives it a liquor license because apparently the best way to encourage structured commerce is to ensure everyone involved is slightly buzzed. This building quickly becomes the nerve center of global finance. Merchants gather, news travels, insurance markets are born. Eventually, Lloyd's of London arises. Yes, the same Lloyd's that insured ships, empires, and, awkwardly, the slave trade. It's hard to explain capitalism's moral trajectory except to say it's complicated and also capitalism. Now, let's swing over to 1719, where the Holy Roman Empire is doing its best impression of mild administrative chaos. Charles VI creates the Principality of Liechtenstein. Why? Because the Liechtenstein family wants a seat in the imperial diet, but the rules say you have to own land directly under the emperor. So they buy two small territories you've never heard of, Vaduz and Schellenberg. And boom, they've created a country so tiny it makes Rhode Island look like Texas. And here's the kicker. The princes don't even visit the place for nearly a century. This is the geopolitical equivalent of buying a plot in the metaverse and forgetting your login. And yet, this microstate survives everything. Revolution, Napoleon, world wars, and the rise and fall of shag carpeting. Today, Liechtenstein is wealthy, neutral, scenic, and more stable than the Wi-Fi at any major airport. Not bad for a country that started as a real estate hack. Segment 3. The First Philippine Republic stands tall and immediately gets steamrolled. Now we leap to January 23, 1899, and travel to the Philippines, where something extraordinary is happening. At Barasoain Church, the First Philippine Republic is inaugurated. The Malolos Constitution takes effect. Emilio Aguinaldo becomes president. Asia gets its first constitutional democracy. It's a huge milestone, a triumph of self-determination, a hard-earned moment of freedom. And then history walks in wearing a large American flag and holding a giant "About That" sign. Because while Filipinos are celebrating their new republic, the United States has already bought the islands from Spain through the Treaty of Paris. Imagine declaring independence, and the next day the landlord knocks and says, "Hey, funny story, you're actually mine now." No, you don't get a say. The U.S. government refuses to recognize the republic, and tensions ignite the Philippine-American War, a conflict so brutal and lopsided it rewrites the fate of the archipelago. It's tragic because the Malolos Constitution was visionary. Separation of powers, civil liberties, secular governance. Filipinos were trying to build a democratic future while being squeezed between a crumbling Spanish empire and an ascending American one. It's like trying to start a garden while two elephants are breakdancing on it. And yet, in 2018, the Philippines finally reclaimed this date as First Philippine Republic Day. A reminder that even if imperial powers rearrange the timeline, the people whose blood wrote the story get the last editorial note. Segment 4. Elizabeth Blackwell crashes the boys' club, and Charles Curtis becomes a paradox. Let's talk about Elizabeth Blackwell, who on January 23, 1849, becomes the first woman in the U.S. to earn a medical degree. She applies to 29 schools. 29. That's the number of times she heard "no because you're a woman" before finally getting a yes. Ironically, because the students thought admitting her would be a joke. They voted yes, thinking she wouldn't actually show up. And then she showed up. And then she graduated first in her class. And then she changed the trajectory of medicine. This is why you don't prank people with high GPAs. They will ruin your curve and your legacy. Blackwell is barred from attending certain lectures because male doctors think women shouldn't hear medical descriptions of the human body, while attending a school literally designed to study the human body. Truly the golden age of hypocrisy. But Blackwell persists, builds the New York Infirmary for Women and Children, hires female physicians, and says, "If you won't let me join your club, fine. I'll build a better one and let your daughters run it." Now fast forward to 1907, when Charles Curtis becomes the first Native American U.S. Senator. His story is complicated, both a milestone and a moral knot. On the one hand, a man of Kaw, Osage, and Potawatomi ancestry rising to the highest legislative chamber, a symbol of representation, a sign that the U.S. political system could occasionally, accidentally, do something inclusive. On the other hand, he authored the Curtis Act, which dismantled tribal governments and communal lands across Indian territory. He advanced assimilationist policies that harmed the very communities his heritage tied him to. He's a historic figure who embodies both progress and the price that progress sometimes extracts. he is a paradox wearing a Senate pin. In other words, Charles Curtis is the human version of a history exam where every answer is, it's complicated. Segment 5. Humans go to the bottom of the ocean and the U.S. Navy hits rock bottom. January 23rd likes extremes. So in 1960, we go all the way to the deepest point on Earth, the Challenger Deep. Swiss scientist Jacques Piccard and U.S. Navy Lieutenant Don Walsh descend in the bathyscaphe Trieste, a vessel that looks like a submarine designed by someone who only had access to empty gasoline tanks and pure optimism. They drop to nearly 11,000 meters. That's 36,000 feet. That's, you are closer to outer space than to the surface you came from, deep. At 9,000 meters, a window cracks. If that were me, I'd have immediately pulled every emergency lever, prayed to 6 different gods, and sworn off swimming forever. But these two keep going, because nothing says foolproof engineering like proceeding after your viewport makes the same noise as a Nerf gun being shot into drywall. They land on the seafloor, see something that might be a flatfish, still debated, and head back up. They prove humans can reach the lowest point on Earth without being turned into aquatic ravioli. It's a triumph of exploration, science, and wild levels of personal courage. Unfortunately, not all U.S. Navy events on January 23rd go so well. Jump to 1968. The USS Pueblo is captured by North Korea. A SIG-int ship with 1 machine gun, yes, 1, is approached by North Korean vessels, torpedo boats, and MiG fighters. It's like bringing a stapler to a tank battle. Commander Lloyd Booker surrenders after 1 sailor is killed and no U.S. air support arrives. North Korea seizes the ship, parades the crew around for propaganda, and gets access to U.S. cryptographic equipment, compromising communications for years. The captured sailors defiantly flip off their captors in photos and tell them it's a Hawaiian good luck sign, which might be the single greatest act of bureaucratic trolling in Cold War history. To this day, North Korea still has the Pueblo. Still. It's a floating America Messed Up exhibit, a museum dedicated to one very bad Tuesday in U.S. naval history. Segment 6. Peace promises, voting rights, primetime trauma, and a global shutdown. January 23rd is basically the overachiever of the calendar, because in 1973 it decides, let's end the Vietnam War. Nixon announces the Paris Peace Accords, the diplomatic equivalent of saying, we're breaking up, but let's still be friends, even though everyone knows one of you is about to change your Netflix password. The deal pulls U.S. troops out, but leaves North Vietnamese forces exactly where they are, like agreeing to stop a fistfight while letting the other guy keep holding a brick. South Vietnam collapses 2 years later, proving that the Accords were less peace agreement and more press release with delusions of grandeur. Now rewind to 1964, when America finally realizes that voting shouldn't be a pay-to-play activity. The 24th Amendment abolishes the poll tax in federal elections, ending a Jim Crow tactic designed to keep black voters and poor white voters out of the booth. It's a rare moment where the Constitution looks at itself and says, let's stop being weird about democracy. Fast forward to 1977, when Roots premieres and forces the United States, 40 million viewers at a time, to confront slavery as more than a sanitized paragraph in a school book. The finale is watched by over 100 million people. That's half the country suddenly Googling their ancestry, shouting Kunta Kinte at their TVs, and realizing history class might have left out a few important bullet points. And then we reach 2020, when Wuhan goes into lockdown, an entire megacity sealed off overnight. 11 million people suddenly experiencing what the rest of the world would soon call Tuesday. It's the flashing neon sign announcing the start of the COVID-19 era, when your hobbies become bread making and sanitizing your mail. And because January 23rd doesn't know how to stop, India also celebrates Parakram Diwas, honoring Subhas Chandra Bose, the revolutionary who looked at Gandhi's nonviolence and said, great idea, but what if we tried the opposite? It's a reminder that national identity isn't a single story. It's a very loud debate between several strongly worded opinions. January 23rd doesn't just give us events, it gives us pivots. Moments where nations reassess, cultures wake up, and the world shifts gears, sometimes gracefully, sometimes like a teenager learning stick shift. In conclusion, January 23rd is the historical version of a group chat where everyone insists on texting at once. Empires rise, mountains fall, democracies are born and crushed. Doctors break barriers, senators contradict their own identities. Submarines descend to the planet's deepest point, while Navy ships drift into international humiliation near North Korea. America tries to end a war, tries to fix voting rights, and tries to watch TV without confronting its past, though Roots made that impossible. And the modern world steps into a pandemic with a lockdown that stops Earth in its tracks. If there's a theme here, it's that history doesn't move in straight lines. It erupts, it contradicts, it U-turns, it leapfrogs, and sometimes it chooses one random winter day to say, let's do everything. January 23rd is a reminder that the human story isn't linear. It's deeply weird, occasionally inspiring, frequently chaotic, and always worth revisiting. Thanks for joining me on this timeline deep dive.